Welcome to the Emetophobia-Free Podcast. Today we are joined by the lovely Lauren Singer, who is based in Central Florida in the States. And Lauren is here today to chat to us all about her story, as Lauren is an ex-emetophobe herself. And the topic for today is travel. We really want to talk about travel. It's something very close to our hearts, both of our hearts. So we are very excited to have you here with us, Lauren. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Good. It's lovely to have you. So, do you want to give us a little bit of background, Lauren, on yourself and your story before we dive into travel and why that is such a sticking point for a lot of people who suffer with emetophobia?
Yeah, for sure. Just in a nutshell, I've had emetophobia since I can remember, as far back as 5 years old. Pretty severe panic attacks, avoidance techniques, things like having a garbage can next to my bed, a lot of shaking in the middle of the night, things like that. Went on and off medication for years, starting at 13 years old. And I tried CBT, hypnotherapy, talk therapy, EMDR, all those things did not work. I had Kindle on my iPad, but I just did not look at it. And I think it was just this fear of failure or not believing that something so debilitating could be cured that easily.
Do you mean Kindle? You mean you had the Thrive program or Emetophobia-Free on your Kindle?
Yes, I did.
Is that what you mean? I thought you just said I had Kindle on my iPad, and I was like, well, what's she reading on Kindle?
Oh, I'm sorry.
The program.
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
I had the regular Thrive program on my Kindle, and I just did not, I don't know, I just did not want to even look at it. So what happened was I revisited the Thrive program a few years later when things were so bad that I just thought if my life could be 20% better, I could survive. Yes. And when I started looking at all the testimonials, I just started to cry and I was excited. I went through the program with a coach and everything changed. And now I'm a coach, which is amazing.
Amazing,
and
yes.
Super rewarding. And the other rewarding thing, as you know, is to be able to travel without anxiety.
Yes.
So,
absolutely. Fabulous. Okay, so when we talk about travel, we are talking about an all-encompassing term here, aren't we? We're not just talking about flying and big international trips. We're talking about the trip to the local supermarket, maybe in the back of somebody's car or as a passenger. Traveling with emetophobia can be very, very difficult because it can be something that you associate being out of your comfort zone with, motion sickness. It's that desire for control that kicks in because you're thinking, oh, I don't know how this is going to go and I can't say for sure if we're going to hit traffic, if we're not, if I'm going to be able to eat when I'm out, if I'm not. So you tend to create a lot of anxiety around travel, or many emetophobes do. So I think what we'll start with is that point at which you get invited to travel or you're faced with the prospect of travel. Because sometimes travel is necessary, it's essential, you can't avoid it, you've got to do it for work or other things. Sometimes it's for pleasure, going on holiday, for example, or a trip down to see relatives or friends. So do you want to describe for you how that felt, the moment that travel was brought up, initiated, if you will? What went on for you when you were an emetophobe at that stage?
I think the initial thought is like, that the first initial thought would be, wow, that would be awesome. I would love to be able to do that. But then you just have this emetophobia inner voice on your shoulder that's just like, yeah, but what if this? And you won't be able to find a bathroom. And what about the social pressures? And there's just so much that goes through your head. It's like your initial person, your conscious will wants to do that thing and is excited about that thing. But then the emetophobia lenses come in and just that's when it all starts, and it's the social anxiety, the pressures, the unpredictability, and the lack of control comes in.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, and it's from myself, from my own journey. When I used to travel, I was the same. I used to love travel, as in the idea of travel, and actually when I was there in certain peak moments when I was there, I would enjoy it. But worst case scenario thinking kicked in pretty much immediately. So when I was at my lowest with emetophobia, and I was struggling to eat anything and I dropped a load of weight, my friends, and these are people that I love dearly. I've been friends with these girls, one since I was 5 years old, one since I was 11 years old. Such a long time. They're very, very dear friends to me, and we were going on a trip to Amsterdam. It was all booked, and we were going for a long weekend to Amsterdam, and I had to say I couldn't go, and I didn't believe that I could go because of the physical symptoms that I was creating, the nausea, the IBS type symptoms. And that was a real turning point for me as well. I mean, it's a different reason that I initially went through the program, but it was a real low point because I love travel, I love exploring, I love new places, but I just couldn't get myself to go because my what if, worst case scenario, well, what if I get on the plane and I have IBS? What if I get on the plane and I'm sick? What if I can't eat the whole time in Amsterdam? And I'll come on to a few stories of trips where I wasn't able to eat very much at all. What if this happens? What if that happens? And it's almost like there's these limits, these barriers that you're sort of going, yes, I want to get there, but these barriers that you put in place for yourself because of your thinking, they all sort of stack up and you feel completely powerless. So that was my lowest. Now, I did manage to travel prior to that. And obviously, since I've overcome emetophobia, it's a completely different experience altogether. But I was able to travel, as I know you were, but it took a lot of effort and it was very draining, is what I would say. Very effortful, very draining. So I've got a few examples of my travels, how emetophobia affected me. Have you got any that you would like to share before I dive into some examples of mine?
Sure. Just in general, I think when you think about all those unknowns, the one that's funny that comes to my mind is I was on a mission trip in Paraguay, and due to the cultural differences, when you're at somebody's home, they're going to fill a big plate of food for you. I mean, huge, right? And you don't pick what's on it. You don't pick how much. So one thing I would do is I would always sit next to like a big guy that I know ate a lot, and I would just kind of pick at it, and then I would just slide it over very discreetly.
Nice.
So that's kind of how I managed things like that. And then, like you said, it would just take so much effort, and it was just like carrying around a ball and chain, because you would go to these beautiful places. Like I went to Italy with my dad, and we're sitting there in this old city, Ferrara, in the square, just eating a lovely Italian meal. And of course, I create the anxiety, I create the IBS, and boom, I'm running into the bathroom. And there's like this old crickety door, and because it's like an old building, they just have a hole in the floor.
Oh, yes. No actual
and
toilet.
It was just, it was so gross. It's like, so I immediately came out and I was like, I have to go home. I have to go to the hotel. Please get the check, and ruined the beautiful night. Just go back to the hotel, having panic for hours. Just awful. So we would, I think you and I talked about the fact that we would go on the trips, but that it was just not fulfilling. It was not what it could be. And you could get little things here and there out of it, but you weren't really living. So
yes. It was more surviving, wasn't it? Which sounds, sounds odd when you're talking about travel and lovely trips like that. But it's a very, it's a sad state of affairs, isn't it? It's because that you want to be enjoying it more than you are. You want to be fully present. You want to be immersed. You want to be experiencing all the new things and the cultures and the foods and everything else. But you just can't bring yourself to do that. It's just too much of a step. It's too big. And the little things that you can put control into, because as we know, emetophobes in general are very good at controlling things around them, and when they can control, they will. So if they are, if they go on a group trip, they often are the designated drivers, because they're like, well, I'll drive, because that means I'm not going to be sat at the back. That means I don't have to drink too much, and it's something that they can then control. They'll know that they're the ones that get to decide when they leave, when they don't.
Yes.
And when you travel, sometimes things are out of your control. There are delays. Sometimes there are things in the hotel that you weren't expecting. There are menus that you weren't expecting, menus in foreign languages that you can't read, and you kind of, no, what is this? Do I order it or do I not? And that, I think, is a really difficult part of travel, those unexpected moments. I was on a trip to Kenya, in 2017, and it was a lovely hotel. It was very, very nice. It was a safari hotel, beautiful. But when we got back to the room before we went down for dinner, I ran the bath water, just ran a bath, and the water was brown. So it was like it got mud in the water. And I immediately went into panic stations because my brain went from, well, this pipe here has clearly got something in it. Let's ring the hotel and ask for either for a different room or for them to come and fix the pipe. But my brain went, well, if that water's contaminated, what about the water they're cooking my food in? I'm not going to be able to eat anything or drink anything apart from bottled water the whole time we're here on this stay. And I just went into a complete meltdown around it. Now, the three people that I was with, were able to go to dinner and enjoy the food. And they didn't do that catastrophizing. They didn't do that worst case scenario. They were able to rationalize and go, well, if it's cooked food, it's going to be cooked water and it's fine and you'll be able to eat it and it's likely not going to be brown that they're cooking the food in. And they were able to rationalize that, but at the time I just wasn't. I was really struggling at that hotel. And I think that those are the kind of incidentals, if you will, that when you're an emetophobe and when you are home, even though it's still difficult when you're at home to deal with emetophobia, you don't have that comfort blanket to go back to. You don't have that safe space. So I can't just get on a plane and go home from Kenya. it's a long way, right? And I'm kind of stuck there for 3 days. So it's being able to gain that perspective and the skills that you're taught during this program are why they're so vital in being able to gain that perspective, because otherwise you do just spend the whole 3 days not eating anything, which is pretty much what I did. But yeah, that was one of my experiences. There was another one. I was at a country music festival in Iowa, and I know you're in the States, but it was August, and it was extremely hot. It was just the cornfields, very, very hot, and there was fast food vans. It's a two-day country music festival, and we were camping, and we had a cool box, but I don't know how hot it was, but it was hot. I can't give you a degree but it was extremely hot. And the cool box did not stay very cool for long. So I'd put a load of effort into controlling what was in the cool box, right? I can eat this. If it stays cold for this amount of time, I can eat this. That'll get me through for 2 days, but that did not stay cold for 2 days. So the only option was to eat from the fast food vans. And I really, really struggled. I actually didn't eat very much at all. And there was a limited amount of bottled water that you could take in. And it was searingly hot. There was lots of taps in the field. So the person that I was with was just drinking from the taps and filling bottles up from the taps. But again, my emetophobia brain didn't trust the taps, wouldn't drink out of that. So I kept tight hold of these bottled waters that was lukewarm and actually very hot. But that's all I drank. And I rationed it. So I wasn't particularly hydrated when we left either. So it's really quite dangerous, the level of thinking that you can get into as an emetophobe when you're traveling, when you have put those black and white boundaries in place for you. I can't eat that and I can't drink that. Right. It's not a healthy place to be. Do you agree? Do you have any stories like that from your own journey?
No, I absolutely agree. And this is such an important topic because it's not just international, it's domestic. When you think like that and you back yourself into such a corner like that and you start exhibiting like agoraphobic tendencies and things like this, it's not healthy. No. Especially with malnutrition and starving yourself, eating only things like safe foods or starving yourself. Like, I just saw a video of somebody who's like, well, I only eat icing. Okay, this is very detrimental. It's debilitating. Yes. So, I think the other one that was really difficult for me was I took a bus tour to Spain by myself, didn't know anybody. And the first day I'm there, I'm like thinking, oh, I'm so brave. I can do this. There's no bathroom on the bus. And they didn't stop for like every 3 hours. The first day I'm there, one of the people was like, oh, I just got over the stomach bug. And I was like, oh no. So they were all sharing alcoholic drinks and things like that. Complete strangers having a wonderful time. Yes. One by one, they kept getting sick. Yeah. And I was like, when is it going to be my turn? Because we were sharing like the hostels and everything. That was very difficult for me. And there was a moment in time where I told the tour guide what was going on. And she's like, well, you can take a train back home if you want from Morocco. And I was like, I had to decide. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to do this. So I did push myself through it, but it was just really miserable. And again, a lot of starving myself, things like that, or just eating like granola bars, safe foods. And I really wanted to try all of the different foods from all the different countries that we visited, Portugal and Morocco and things. So I did have an okay time, but man, I wish I could do that trip all over again now.
Yes, much more relaxed. Yeah. So when we are talking about travel and emetophobia and all of these examples, I'm sure they're very relatable to people out there who are listening and going, oh yes, I would do similar in that situation, or I even wouldn't go in the first place, because I know you can create stories about travel and certain modes of travel and belief systems about certain modes of travel that limit you from going on them. For example, I've worked with quite a few people who don't believe they can fly because they've created a narrative that people get sick on airplanes, or they get sick on airplanes, even though they've never been on an airplane where somebody's got sick, and they've never been sick on an airplane. But because of the narrative they've created in their head about it, they avoid it. And I think at the end of this podcast, we're going to go through some tips, three steps to take to prepare yourself if you are living with emetophobia and going on an upcoming trip. And one of those is to gain perspective and to understand when your thoughts are helpful or unhelpful, and look for an alternative viewpoint and actively seek it, because that's generally not what we do. So, for example, a good example of this is a shorter trip for me. It was just down to Tunbridge, where my my husband's brother lives, and we were staying with them for the first time. I'd never been to their house before, and we were staying with them for the first time, staying in their house for the full weekend, and I didn't know what they ate, and I'd never been to their house, so I didn't know levels of hygiene, and there were so many unknowns. And I really struggled with that level of unknown because, again, of the social pressure. So I didn't want to offend if they made me food and I went, I'm sorry, I can't eat that. And I had a lot of narratives in my head about what I could and couldn't do before I even got there. It was like, I can't have them cook for me. They can't cook for me because I don't know how they cook. So I just put this black and white blanket rule belief system in place myself. I've got to cook for myself, or I've got to be in the kitchen while they're cooking so I can be really hyper vigilant and watch what they're cooking and then inspect it just in case I can eat it. And at no stage did I question. At no stage did I go, okay, well, are these people chronically ill? Have these people ever been chronically ill? My husband grew up with this person. Is he always ill? Is he constantly sick because of his food hygiene? I didn't question it. I just put the rule in place. I had the thought and I ran with it. And that is part of the program, and a really important part, because what you're doing is questioning your thought processes, which is sometimes something we just don't do. We have a thought process, we run with it, we believe it, and that's that. And that can be really damaging when it comes to travel, because there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of things that we don't know. And if you've got this blanket rule in place and you're not constantly readdressing and looking for evidence that this is fine and it's unlikely that I'll get sick and I can cope, and I'm not looking for any evidence other than what I've told myself, I'm going to find it really difficult to shift that anxiety and that stress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have examples of times that you had told yourself stories that you stuck rigidly to, even though the evidence was overwhelmingly to the contrary?
Oh, I'm sure, for sure. I would hear, I think sometimes I would get freaked out by other people's stories, like, oh, well, I got sick one time on a plane for hours and I was stuck in that little bathroom, And I did pick up a little bit of some avoidance techniques from my dad. He has IBS, so he would say, oh, I'm not going to eat before I go on a plane because you're stuck in the seat. And what if you're, one time I was stuck on the tarmac for 3 hours and they would not let you get up. Yeah. So I started creating those narratives and the black and white thinking, like, okay, if I don't eat, I'll be safe and I can control this.
Yes.
And I absolutely, yes, because you're only looking for the evidence to confirm that limiting belief, and then it becomes real to you.
Yes.
And you only think about those stories. You don't think about all the success stories.
Nope.
or all the times that you actually were fine.
Yes.
So getting perspective is so crucial, and it lowers that anxiety that you're creating, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a skill set. It's something that you have to practice, because if you've never done it before, which I hadn't before I went through this program, I had a thought and I believed it. It does take practice, and it does take that, okay, hang on a moment, slow down. Let's just have a little think. Where's evidence to the contrary? So another great example, I was a teacher in a previous life, and I used to go on residentials with the kids every year, and there was my emetophobia got particularly bad, and we would all eat in this canteen where literally 10, 20 schools worth of children would all come after a day of activities, pick up their knives and forks on the way, wash their hands, pick up their knives and forks on the way in, and then choose some food from around the edge, and then go and sit down. And I told myself the story, even though there was places to wash your hands before you went and touched the knives and forks, I told myself the story that some of those children will not have washed their hands correctly,
Right.
and I'm likely to get sick from doing that. What I didn't do is go, okay, well, I've been a teacher at this school now for about 9 years. I've been on the residential before. All of my colleagues have been on the residentials multiple times. I've never known any of them get sick. I've never heard of anybody coming back from that residential, children or adult, getting sick. But I didn't question it. I just thought, well, logic in my emetophobic brain, emetophobia logic, loads of people touching the knives and forks, therefore there's a high risk. So what I did, this is where my desire for control kicked into another level entirely, was I took a mini fridge with me. I drove down separately to everybody else in my car with a mini fridge, and I ate cheese sandwiches out of that mini fridge for 3 days. I did not go into the canteen. I wouldn't go and supervise, because I just couldn't. And I had to explain that to my boss at the time and say, I'm really sorry, this is what's going on for me. I can come on the trip, but this is going to be the limitation. And that's really hard. That's a really difficult conversation to have with somebody. But I didn't question it at the time. I knew logically, I was like, well, logically, most people are going to be fine, but I'm not taking the risk because I don't think I'm going to be. And I stuck to it. Didn't question it. Didn't spend any real amount of time looking for evidence to the contrary. And I think that's massively important when you're thinking about a trip going anywhere, no matter how far it is. It's looking for the evidence to support the life that you want. So the life that I would have wanted is to be able to go on that trip, supervise the kids, eat with them, just relaxed, be and present in the moment. That's what I would have wanted. And it's the question of, well, what thought processes, what beliefs do I need to have to make that a reality? And let's look for that evidence rather than, I can't do this, I need to keep myself safe. So let's just go down this route and find a way around it, i.e. a mini fridge for 3 days. It's just quite extraordinary.
Yeah. It is. Wow. I think that black and white thinking just comes from this extreme belief, that limiting belief that there's just absolutely no way. It's like, if there's a 0.0001% chance, that's it. Not taking a chance.
Yes.
No way.
Yeah.
So that's when you start creating those rules and all the unhelpful thinking styles, like that you're also catastrophizing, and they lead into each other, and they magnify each other as well.
They do.
So
yes.
yeah, that's a really good
do.
example.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And I think it's so important, when you were talking before about listening to other people's stories, that you remember, maybe not remember if you've never read the program, but part of the program explains to you how our minds work and how everybody on the planet is viewing life through their own set of lenses. Nobody's experiencing reality. We are all creating our own experience based on these lenses that we have. So when somebody is telling you a story about how awful it was when they got sick on a flight one time, or how terrible it was when there was norovirus on the cruise, or whatever else it might have been, you have to let them own that experience and understand that your experience can be completely different to that. Yes. That is just their experience. That's not gospel. That's not fact. That's not the hard truth. That is their experience. And it's important that you take that power back from other people and their experiences of travel, Because if you say you're not careful, what you do is you hear one story and you go, well, I'm not doing that then. So you can, for example, hear a story of somebody going, oh, well, I went to Morocco, for example. I got really, really sick in Morocco. Or like Sophie was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying she got sick on a skiing holiday on the ski slopes. And if you take that as gospel, we're not saying it didn't happen, it did. But if you cling on to that and you go, well, skiing must be unsafe then, okay, and you create this narrative around it, and Morocco must be unsafe, you start creating these rules. What you need to do is go, okay, well, how many other people go skiing every year and are fine? How many people go to Morocco every year and are fine? And it's looking for that other evidence is so important to start to gain that perspective when you're traveling or faced with travel.
Yes. I always tell my clients it's like you're hacking your own brain system with its cognitive bias and how it wants to keep you safe.
Yes.
But emetophobes have just created smaller and smaller and smaller world for themselves, and what we need to do is just incrementally increase it and grow it back to where it's healthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So I wonder then, obviously we've been shared a few stories of travel with emetophobia. Do you have experiences of travel after emetophobia, and what is the difference there?
Yeah, I think the one awesome thing is you're just not having thousands of thoughts a day about it. And you're not even, you're realizing you're making these plans without those big scary thoughts. And you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like I just booked a snorkeling adventure in August in Puerto Rico.
Amazing.
And I loved it. I didn't even think about the bathroom situation.
No.
Like at all. I was like, I'll cope with it. I'll deal with it. And there was a bathroom and I didn't even go once. So it was fine.
Perfect. Yes.
It was wonderful.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And I think we've literally in the past 48 hours booked only a city break in January, this coming January, for our daughter's 2nd birthday to Copenhagen. And I created a lot of anxiety around cities, particularly traveling to cities, public transport, very crowded, all that kind of stuff when I had emetophobia. And I was just so excited. I'm so excited to go because I'm thinking, well, that's the hotel, looks fabulous. Tell you what I would have done as well, I would have checked all the restaurants in the vicinity. I would have Googled the best restaurants in Copenhagen and said, right, we're only going to any of the top 10. And I would have read the reviews and I would have searched the reviews for any incidents of any words. I'd put food poisoning in, I'd put sick, I would put vomit in, and make sure that none of the reviews said those things before I agreed to go to this restaurant. I've done none of that. I'm really excited to just go and walk around and see what I fancy and what looks good and go and eat. And it's lovely to have the confidence to be able to do that without the stress and the worry and the constant nausea that you would have in a lead up to a trip beforehand, because that would have been something that I would have just constantly brooded about and obsessed about. What if this and what if that, and let's put some effort into control that, and let's control this, and and I made a full itinerary for the full days to make sure that you could go to that place, then that place, and then that hotel and that food would be similar. Okay, and I can get there. I would have done all of that business, and I'm just so excited to have a full 3 days in this city with no agenda. We'll just go and we'll just see what happens. My husband can choose. My daughter, she's 2, right? So she's going to point at these. That's about it. But just being able to be present, be relaxed, not to have to over control everything is such a relief and such a difference to 9 or 10 years ago when I was traveling with emetophobia. It's completely night and day.
Yeah, one thing I hear a lot in consultations is, oh my goodness, I just wish I could be spontaneous, especially for my children, and I just can't be right now.
Yes.
And one other thing I always say is like, look, exhibiting desire for control, like it feels really good in the moment. It almost feels like a hit of just relaxation and safety, and you feel powerful, but that's not true. You actually feel a lot heavier. You actually feel worse, and just it takes your power from you. And so when you're able to give up that desire for control like you're talking about, it just feels like this huge burden was lifted, and you're so much more light and so much more free. And like you said, you're able to be present in the moment.
Yes, yeah. And that's
Yeah.
what you want when you're traveling. You want to be immersed in the experience,
Yes.
and you want to be present, and you want to be excited and looking forward to the adventure that you're about to have, which emetophobia makes very, very difficult. Now,
Yes.
some of my clients, we've talked a lot about big trips. Some of my clients really struggle with simply going in the car.
Yes.
Even driving themselves sometimes, even driving themselves from A to B, because of the fact that they believe they are stuck in the car, and then if they do feel sick or need to be sick, then they'd have to be sick far away from their home. So a lot of them go, well, I can travel, but only 10 minutes from home, so make sure I get back in time. And I think it's so important that, people understand that is the reality that emetophobes create for themselves, and it is terrifying to them. However, if you are listening to this and do have emetophobia, know that you don't have to live like that. That is something that you can change how you view, and you can change your entire experience of travel, whether it's you driving, being in the passenger seat, being in the back seat, going on a coach, whatever else it might be. You have the power to change how you view that, because other people are very happy and very calm and content driving and being a passenger and being in the back seat. Some people even prefer to be a passenger and be in the back seat because they could just listen to their music or whatever else they want to do. That's totally possible for you too. It's a matter of learning a skill set, and it's the skill set that matters, and putting the effort into applying that skill set so that you can unlock your potential with travel, because travel's such a lovely part of life, and it's something that a lot of people really get a lot out of and enjoy. And it's unfortunate that emetophobia stifles that quite a bit a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's part of life. They need to be able to pick up their children from school. They need to be able to go to the grocery store. It's how we function. It's how we live. It's a necessity.
Yes, so, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So shall we touch on these 3 top tips then? So if you have an upcoming trip and you have emetophobia, obviously we're going to advocate for reading the program if you have the ability. If you don't at this moment in time, the other podcasts are absolutely fabulous. They're filled with insights into how your mind works, and they're completely free. So start working your way through those. But this number 1 that we've talked an awful lot about is that gaining perspective. So taking that moment, take that time to go, okay, how would a non-emetophobe view this? How would somebody who isn't terrified of being sick or seeing other people be sick view this situation? Let's take a little bit of time to see what I can come up with there. Perhaps even ask other people who aren't emetophobic how they view it, what thoughts they have about it, and then start collecting that evidence that supports the experience of that travel that you want to have. Do you have anything to add on that first point, which is gaining that perspective? Bless you.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So in preparing for this podcast, I was actually talking to some other people. And the interesting thing is, it's not just emetophobes that kind of struggle with a little bit of anxiety around traveling. So absolutely getting perspective, and really focusing on the outcome and the goal of what you're trying to achieve. Like, hey, I need to get to my brother's wedding. This is what's important right now. It's not how I get there. It's the beach in Puerto Rico. It's the final destination that can really help you grab that perspective and just calm down your catastrophic thinking as well. Like, is it really that bad? Is it really going to, just because it's happened to that person, is it going to happen to me? Kind of like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
That's just massively helpful to calm down some of those initial emetophobic thoughts, the limitations, the restrictions that come into your head. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Brilliant. Okay. So, gaining perspective, really important. The second tip then would be to use your imagination powerfully. Now, sometimes especially if you haven't read the program, you will hear imagination and wonder what we're talking about and why that can help. Your imagination is incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly powerful tool, and it's something that people who perform, if you will, for a living, sportsmen, actors, dancers, for example, they are trained to use their imagination powerfully. So when they get on the football field, the rugby pitch, hockey pitch, whatever else. They've rehearsed in their mind, they have played out them having a good game, them scoring the goals, them making good passes. They've rehearsed how they want it to go, because ultimately what you're doing is priming yourself for that to be the outcome. So how you imagine yourself on that trip is incredibly important. So let's say you create, let's give it a bit of context, you create real anxiety about going to on a work trip. On a work trip, let's say you've got to go on a work trip, an annual work trip or a monthly work trip down to another city on a train. And you create a whole heap of anxiety about this each month. Likely what's happening is you are telling yourself a really unhelpful story about it, but you're also imagining yourself on that train feeling panicked. And you're imagining yourself on that train feeling tense and looking around and being hypervigilant and checking who's looking ill and who isn't, and have I touched anything, and have I touched my mouth with my hands. So you're imagining how you don't want the trip to go. You're imagining the worst case scenario. And we do this to try and protect ourselves, because we think, well, if I imagine the worst case scenario, I'll be prepared. I'll know what it's going to be like if that worst case scenario does occur. So that's why I'm going to imagine it all going wrong. The problem is what you're doing there is you're priming yourself for a really anxious, stressed trip, because you are rehearsing responding in that way. If I've rehearsed being anxious on that train, that's more than likely what's going to happen. So you need to put a little bit of energy and a little bit of time into sitting yourself down somewhere nice and quiet and going, okay, well, what does it look like to be on that train, doing that trip without the anxiety, without the stress? How does that feel? What am I saying to myself at that point? What am I focusing on if I'm not focusing on being hypervigilant? How do I want to experience that thing? And you need to rehearse that narrative. So your imagination is incredibly important, because rehearsing how you want that outcome to go, that trip to go, that journey to go, is likely priming yourself to experience it in that way. It's a rehearsal. You're rehearsing it. Do you have anything to add on that point?
Yeah, imagination is so powerful. Like, your brain can't even distinguish sometimes the difference between real life and your imagination. So,
correct.
And yeah, I always talk to my clients about priming, and the research that we have on it is incredibly powerful. You're setting yourself up for success. And the other thing is, creating all those what if scenarios, it's never helpful. It's never productive. There's nothing on the other side of that that is going to help you. So the minute you start realizing you're doing that, don't beat yourself up, but just switch that narrative over, amend those thoughts, and create and magnify what you really want to happen. And it will become real, because then your brain's going to start looking for the evidence to confirm that narrative, like you said, that belief.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So imagine, so run down so far, gain your perspective, look for evidence that your perspective at the moment is a little bit warped, a little bit catastrophic, a little bit black and white, very negative.
Yes.
So look for the evidence to the contrary of that. Use your imagination to help you rather than hinder you. You imagine how you want that journey to go, how you want the trip to go, how you want to feel when you're staying in your in-laws' house, for example. And then the third one is build the belief you want to have about yourself and travel. Now, when you first go on a trip, if you've been emetophobic for many, many years, and you are first possibly going on that trip, that you're thinking, oh, crikey, I've not been on a trip this long yet, or I've never been to this person's house, or I've never been to this destination before. What you want to do, your emetophobic mind is going to try and convince you that it's full of danger and that you can't do it and that you can't go. What you need to do is go, well, hang on a minute. I want to build a belief that I can do it and I can tolerate any discomfort along the way. Because sometimes when you have a plan in your mind and you say you get on the runway and you're taking off for a lovely holiday somewhere and it's delayed, as you know happened with your dad, for 3 hours, you want to build the belief that you can tolerate that and you can cope with that. So it's looking for the evidence when you go, okay, let's take a look back, let's reflect back over my life here and go, okay, that was a really unexpected turn of events when that happened, but I coped and I managed and I did it and I got through it. That was a really difficult time when this happened in life, and I created, it was really, really hard for me. And I created loads of negative emotions around it, but I got through it and I managed it, and I can do it. I can tolerate it. I don't need to avoid that discomfort. I can manage.
Yes.
So you want to build the belief for yourself that you can do difficult things. You can tolerate being a little bit uncomfortable, because that's going to stand you in good stead for going on a trip with a load of unknown factors to it.
Right. Yes, and when you do make any kind of, on your journey, when you do make any kind of incremental steps, baby steps, whatever you want to call them, it's so important to process them in a really powerful way, and to reward yourself, and to praise yourself, and to celebrate.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if what everybody else is doing. Don't compare yourself. Like, you have to say, okay, if I only go 5 minutes in the car, and today I went 10 minutes in the car, just make that huge for yourself.
Absolutely.
And really pat yourself on the back, and then build that belief every single time. I did cope with this. See, I am getting better. I am able to do this. Absolutely.
Yes.
And you're going to feel more powerful. Just like you felt less powerful every time you told yourself, I couldn't cope. This would be the worst thing in the world. It's just a habit. It's only a habit. There's no guilt or shame. It was just something that you got on the wrong track, and then you reinforced it. And all we're doing now is switching the track and reinforcing, building the belief in the fact that we can cope and we can do this.
Brilliant. Fabulous. Lovely. So today's podcast has been all about travel. I wonder if other people who are listening to this, if they have any questions that they want to ask either myself or Lauren about travel, then feel free to post them underneath the video, and we will answer those questions, or reach out to us on any social media platform, and we will do so. But thank you, Lauren, for a fabulous podcast, and for sharing your experiences and your wisdom. And we hope it's been helpful to anybody out there who is suffering with emetophobia and struggling with travel, but also helpful to the people out there who are supporting a loved one with emetophobia and really struggling to understand why they find this such a chore, why they find this such a hard thing to do. And hopefully it lets them gain that little bit of understanding as to what's going on, and can help them to support that loved one. That's our aim. That's our whole aim, is to help as many people with emetophobia as possible. So thank you so much for being here. Do you have any final words or anything that you would like to share before we leave today?
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome.
I love this topic. It's very close to our hearts, and so many other people, all my clients, absolutely. Just the message is, you can do this. Absolutely. Yep. Be kind to yourself. Take these baby steps and process them strong, process them well. You will get there. It's okay. Yes. It's okay if it's slow. You will absolutely get there. You can do this. You can absolutely overcome emetophobia.
Brilliant. And travel as much as you want to, as freely as you want to.
Yes, it's amazing. Yes,
it is amazing. It is. Okay, I will leave you to it. Thank you so much, and I will speak to you soon.